January 27th, 1967. Tri Tam, Binh Duong Province, South Vietnam. Specialist 4 Donald Ward Evans Jr. crouched behind a rice paddy dike. Automatic weapons fire raked the position his unit had occupied just seconds earlier. The ambush had erupted without warning. North Vietnamese regulars opening fire from a bunker complex, discovered by another platoon from Company A, 2nd Battalion, 12th Infantry Regiment, 4th Infantry Division. Men lay scattered across 100 meters of open terrain. Evans could hear them screaming for medic. He carried the medical bag, wore the Red Cross armband, understood the code that demanded he move toward the wounded rather than away. But something seemed wrong about this firefight. His platoon hadn't even been committed to battle yet, positioned 100 meters back in relative safety. The wounded men calling for help belonged to a different platoon, one that had stumbled into the enemy position and was being systematically destroyed by concentrated fire and grenades. Evans made his decision in seconds. He sprinted across open ground through withering fire and exploding grenades, reached the first wounded soldier, administered life-saving treatment while bullets kicked up dirt around him, then moved to treat each of the other wounded men. What Specialist 4 Donald Ward Evans Jr. did over the next hours would earn him the Medal of Honor posthumously, proving that some soldiers measure duty not in tactical calculations, but in lives saved regardless of cost. The 23-year-old medic from Covina, California, was about to demonstrate that heroism isn't about surviving combat, but about refusing to let brothers die when you can reach them, even when reaching them means accepting wounds that will kill you. Evans made his decision before conscious thought could intervene. He rose from cover behind the rice paddy dike and sprinted directly toward the sound of screaming. 100 meters of open ground separated his platoon's position from where the wounded lay scattered across the battlefield. North Vietnamese machine gun fire raked the terrain, kicking up dirt in patterns that demonstrated deliberate targeting. Evans ran at full speed, his medical bag bouncing against his hip, the Red Cross armband on his left sleeve marking him as priority target, under enemy doctrine that ignored Geneva Convention protections. Combat medics in Vietnam faced mathematics that defied moral calculation. They carried no offensive weapons in many cases, wore identifying red crosses that enemy forces deliberately targeted, and operated under code that demanded moving toward danger when every instinct screamed for cover. The North Vietnamese and Viet Cong understood that killing medics multiplied casualties exponentially. A wounded soldier might recover. A wounded soldier denied treatment died. And watching medics die trying to reach casualties broke unit morale more effectively than any tactical victory. Evans understood these calculations. Every medic in Vietnam understood them. The code demanded treating wounded regardless of risk, and that code transcended rational self-preservation. Evans covered the 100 meters in maybe 30 seconds, though small arms fire made each second feel extended beyond normal time. He dropped beside the first casualty, a soldier from Company A's lead platoon who had taken rounds through the abdomen. Evans tore open his medical bag, extracted field dressings, and began applying direct pressure to stop bleeding, while enemy rounds impacted the ground around them. The wounded soldier was conscious, screaming, going into shock from blood loss. Evans worked with hands that remained steady despite the fire, administering morphine, applying pressure dressings, securing airways. He saved the soldier's life through treatment administered under conditions that should have killed both of them. The medic's code that Evans embodied transcended unit boundaries and transformed professional duty into universal brotherhood. He wasn't treating a soldier from his own platoon. He was treating a wounded man who needed a medic, and Evans carried the medical bag. That the wounded soldier belonged to a different unit, that Evans' own platoon remained in relative safety 100 meters back, that regulations didn't require him to expose himself for casualties outside his assigned element. None of this mattered. The code was absolute. Wounded men needed treatment. Medics provided treatment, and risk was subordinate to duty. But as Evans finished treating the first casualty and glanced across the kill zone, he counted at least 6 more wounded men scattered across open ground, each of them screaming for help that no one else would provide, because reaching them meant crossing terrain swept by concentrated fire. Evans had made one trip across that 100 meters and survived through combination of speed, timing, and probability. Making a second trip would compound the odds against survival. Making 6 trips approached mathematical certainty of death, yet the wounded continued screaming, and Evans remained the only medic close enough to reach them before they bled out. Evans dragged the first casualty back to cover, then immediately turned and sprinted back across the open ground, toward the wounded men who remained exposed. The second trip was more dangerous than the first. North Vietnamese gunners had identified the medic with the Red Cross armband and adjusted their fire accordingly. Rounds kicked up dirt in patterns that tracked Evans' movement across the kill zone. Grenade fragments from enemy fire exploded near his position. He reached the second wounded soldier and dropped beside him, hands already pulling field dressings from his medical bag before his knees hit ground. The North Vietnamese deliberately targeted medics as tactical doctrine. Killing a rifleman removed 1 gun from the fight. Killing a medic multiplied casualties by denying treatment to wounded soldiers who might otherwise survive. Preventing evacuation forced units to divert combat personnel to carry casualties, degrading fighting strength. Most devastatingly, watching medics die while attempting rescue broke unit cohesion more effectively than any amount of firepower. The enemy understood that Americans prioritized casualty evacuation above tactical objectives, and they exploited this cultural value ruthlessly. Evans' Red Cross armband made him the highest value target on the battlefield, after officers and machine gunners. Evans treated the second casualty, then moved to a third without evacuating to safety. He moved from wounded man to wounded man, administering morphine, applying tourniquets, stabilizing airways, offering encouragement through words that somehow carried over the noise of combat. Each casualty received treatment that saved lives, treatment administered under conditions where most medics would have been killed within minutes. Evans survived through combination of speed, tactical awareness developed through months in country, and sheer statistical improbability. But probability operates on mathematical principles that don't accommodate repeated trials. Each trip across the kill zone increased the odds that the next burst of fire would find its target. The psychological horror of Evans's choice was absolute. Courage in a single moment can be understood as adrenaline, instinct, or trained response. But Evans made the choice repeatedly, trip after trip, each time understanding that the probability of death increased with every crossing. This wasn't momentary bravery, but sustained defiance of fear, calculated acceptance of odds that approached certainty, systematic choice to prioritize wounded men above personal survival. The men watching from positions of relative safety witnessed courage that transcended normal human capacity for facing death, proving that heroism isn't measured in single actions, but in the accumulated weight of decisions made under conditions that should break anyone. As Evans treated the 4th or 5th casualty, witnesses would later differ on exact count. Grenade fragments struck him in the shoulder and leg. The wounds were serious and painful, bleeding profusely enough to weaken him noticeably. Officers and fellow soldiers shouted for him to fall back for treatment. Evans ignored them. He finished treating the wounded soldier beside him, then dragged that man back across the fire-swept ground to safety. The evacuation required carrying another person's weight across 100 meters of open terrain. While wounded, bleeding, and under continuous fire, Evans accomplished it. Deposited the wounded soldier behind cover, then turned and prepared to return to the forward area where more casualties remained. Evans' own platoon had been committed to battle by this point, ordered forward to reinforce the ambushed unit. As his unit moved into position, Evans continued treating wounded soldiers scattered across the battlefield. His medical bag was nearly empty, depleted by repeated use. Blood soaked his uniform from shoulder and leg wounds that would have justified medical evacuation. His hands shook from shock and blood loss. Fellow medics and officers repeatedly ordered him to fall back for treatment. Evans refused. More wounded men required aid, and he remained capable of providing it despite his deteriorating condition. Evacuating wounded under fire represented the most dangerous action a medic could attempt. Treating casualties in place allowed medics to work from positions of relative cover, moving between casualties while maintaining tactical awareness. Evacuation required sustained exposure while carrying another person's weight across open ground. Unable to seek cover or defend yourself, moving slowly enough that enemy gunners could track and engage you. Most medics treated casualties in place and waited for litter teams to perform evacuation. Evans had been performing both roles simultaneously for over an hour, treating men where they fell, then dragging or carrying them across 100 meters of kill zone to safety. As he moved to treat yet another wounded soldier, Evans recognized that this casualty's wounds required immediate evacuation. Waiting for a litter team meant the soldier would likely bleed out before reaching medical aid. Evans made his decision without apparent hesitation. He lifted the wounded man onto his shoulders in a fireman's carry and began moving across the open ground toward the aid station. The load was substantial. The distance was 100 meters. Enemy fire was concentrated, and Evans was already weakened from his own wounds and blood loss. He moved forward anyway. The medic's creed that Evans embodied in those final moments transcended written doctrine or formal training. It represented distillation of values that separated combat medics from other military specialties. That saving lives mattered more than preserving your own. That duty extended until death made continuation physically impossible. That wounded men deserved every chance at survival regardless of risk to the person providing treatment. Evans could have stopped at any point. His own wounds justified evacuation. He had already saved multiple lives through actions far exceeding normal expectations. But the code permitted no calculation of personal risk against duty owed to wounded men who needed a medic. Evans covered maybe 50 meters before additional enemy fire struck him. The rounds hit with enough force to stop his forward progress. He staggered, went down on one knee, attempted to rise. Witnesses watched him struggle to maintain the carry despite wounds that should have killed him instantly. He managed several more steps before collapsing. The wounded soldier he had been carrying survived. Evans did not. His body was found later, still in carrying position, arms wrapped around the comrade he had died trying to save, testament to devotion that extended literally until death made continuation impossible. Combat medics in Vietnam sustained casualty rates that exceeded almost every other military specialty. More than 1,100 Army medics and 680 Navy corpsmen were killed in action during the war. About 3,300 more were wounded. These numbers represented disproportionately high losses compared to the roughly 10,000 medical personnel who served in combat roles. The mathematics were grim. Being a medic or corpsman in Vietnam meant facing odds of death or injury that approached 1 in 3, higher than infantry riflemen, and exceeded only by point men and machine gunners who drew concentrated fire. The reasons for these casualty rates were tactical and cultural. Army medics received minimal combat training, about 14 hours of field training compared to weeks of medical instruction. They carried medical bags weighing 15 to 20 pounds, filled with bandages, morphine, plasma, and instruments. Many carried no offensive weapons, relying on fellow soldiers for protection. Most distinctively, they wore Red Cross armbands identifying them as medical personnel, protected under Geneva Convention provisions that enemy forces routinely ignored. North Vietnamese and Viet Cong doctrine explicitly targeted medics, understanding that killing medical personnel multiplied casualties by denying treatment, and broke unit morale more effectively than killing riflemen. The psychological burden medics carried transcended physical danger. They were responsible for keeping men alive under conditions that ensured many would die, regardless of treatment quality. They administered aid while under fire, made triage decisions determining who received treatment first, and watched soldiers die despite their best efforts. The moral weight of this responsibility created trauma that haunted many medics for decades after the war. Medic Rafael Matos, who served during the Tet Offensive, wrote in the New York Times that unexpected flashbacks still haunted him decades later, that the smell of rare steak could trigger memories of gunpowder and cordite, that psychological wounds remained as real as physical ones. Yet medics like Evans represented the purest expression of military service, saving lives rather than taking them, while infantry soldiers trained to engage and destroy enemy forces, medics trained to heal regardless of whose life hung in balance. The medic's code demanded treating enemy wounded alongside American casualties, providing aid to civilians caught in combat, and moving toward danger when every instinct demanded retreat. This created situations where the most compassionate soldiers faced the greatest danger, where medical training became moral calling, where professional duty transcended into spiritual commitment. The medic's code demanded actions that defied rational self-preservation. When wounded soldiers screamed for help, medics moved toward the screaming, even when movement meant accepting near certain death. When triage required choosing who received treatment first, medics made calculations that haunted them forever. When supplies ran low, medics continued treating casualties with whatever remained. The code permitted no calculation of personal risk against duty owed to wounded men. 15 Army medics and 4 Navy corpsmen received the Medal of Honor during Vietnam. 19 total medals recognizing courage so extraordinary it transcended normal military service. 10 of these medals were awarded posthumously. But Evans's actions on January 27, 1967, exceeded even this extraordinary standard. He made repeated trips across kill zones when single trips earned medals. He treated casualties under fire that should have killed him within seconds. He continued functioning after sustaining wounds that justified evacuation. He died carrying a wounded soldier to safety despite injuries that had already earned him the right to stop. His courage compounded beyond comprehension, proving that heroism at its highest expression isn't measured in single moments, but in accumulated decisions made under conditions that should break anyone. Decisions to prioritize wounded men above personal survival until death makes continuation physically impossible. The documentation began within hours of Evans' death. Company commanders interviewed survivors who had witnessed his actions, recording statements while memory remained fresh and details remained vivid. Soldiers described counting Evans' trips across the kill zone, watching him treat casualties under fire, witnessing his refusal to evacuate despite wounds. Battalion intelligence officers compiled after-action reports, documenting the engagement, casualty figures, and timeline of events. The paperwork moved up the chain of command, from company to battalion to brigade, each level reviewing the evidence and determining whether Evans' actions met the extraordinary standard required for Medal of Honor consideration. The Medal of Honor review process operates with deliberate rigor, designed to ensure only actions meeting exceptional standards receive the nation's highest military decoration. Witness statements must corroborate extraordinary valor beyond normal expectations of combat duty. Medical records and casualty reports must verify circumstances described. Command recommendations must articulate why the actions transcended heroism expected of soldiers in combat. For posthumous awards, the standard requires even greater scrutiny. The recommendation must prove beyond doubt that the recipient died performing actions so selfless, so clearly undertaken despite near certainty of death, that they distinguished themselves above all others who served. Evans' case met every criterion. Multiple witnesses described actions spanning hours, not minutes. Medical records documented wounds sustained while treating casualties, proving Evans continued functioning despite injuries justifying evacuation. The tactical situation, 100 meters of exposed terrain swept by concentrated fire, established that Evans's repeated crossings defied survivability calculations. The final carry, performed while wounded and under fire, represented courage so absolute that no reasonable person could question whether it exceeded normal expectations. The recommendation moved forward with unanimous support through every level of review. Notification reached Evans' family in Covina, California, months after his death. The telegram arrived with formal language explaining that Specialist 4, Donald Ward Evans, Jr., would be awarded posthumously the Medal of Honor for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at risk of life above and beyond the call of duty. The citation detailed his actions with clinical precision that somehow captured the extraordinary nature of what he had accomplished. The repeated trips across fire-swept ground, the treatment administered under conditions that should have killed him, the refusal to evacuate despite wounds, the final carry that cost his life while saving another. The medal honored not just Evans but represented all medics who died saving others. The citation described one man's actions on one day, but the courage it recognized belonged to thousands who wore the Red Cross, carried the medical bag, and moved toward danger when everyone else sought cover. Evans became symbol of sacrifice shared by every medic who died treating casualties, every corpsman who refused evacuation to continue working, every medical specialist who understood that the code demanded prioritizing wounded men above personal survival. The medal crystallized in physical form values that defined an entire profession, but no medal could return Evans to his family. No citation could restore a life ended at 23. No recognition could compensate parents who received a folded flag instead of a son, siblings who lost a brother, a community that lost a young man who had enlisted to serve. The Medal of Honor acknowledged extraordinary valor and ensured Evans's sacrifice would be remembered across generations, but it could not answer the question that haunted everyone who understood what his courage had cost, whether any nation deserved such sacrifice, whether any cause justified asking so much, whether valor at this level revealed humanity at its finest or warfare at its most terrible. Fort Carson leadership made the decision in 1986, nearly 20 years after Evans's death. The original hospital complex, built in 1942, would be renamed Evans Army Community Hospital, ensuring that Specialist 4 Donald Ward Doc Evans, Jr. would be remembered through an institution dedicated to the healing mission he had died fulfilling. The naming represented more than ceremonial honor. It established perpetual memorial in daily service provided to soldiers and their families. Military facilities named after Medal of Honor recipients serve functions transcending commemoration. The names become constant reminders of values defining military service. Soldiers receiving treatment at Evans Army Community Hospital learn why the facility bears that name. The story of a 23-year-old medic who made repeated trips through kill zones to save wounded men, who refused evacuation despite his own wounds, who died carrying a comrade to safety. Medical personnel working at the hospital understand they practice healing arts in building named for someone who embodied those values absolutely. The name transforms facility into living lesson about duty, sacrifice, and the medic's code that prioritizes saving lives above preserving your own. Evans Army Community Hospital opened at Fort Carson and began fulfilling its mission of providing health care to military personnel and their families. The facility grew into substantial operation, 2,300 military and civilian personnel, 76 beds, serving enrolled population exceeding 55,000 beneficiaries, conducting about 3,500 outpatient visits daily. The hospital manages 16 outlying clinics and teams, including soldier-centered medical homes providing health care across Fort Carson, behavioral health clinics offering mental health services, and public health facilities focused on disease prevention. Evans Army Community Hospital has earned recognition for quality care, receiving highest scores among military healthcare facilities and earning American College of Surgeons commendation for surgical patient outcomes. The continuity was profound and complete. Evans had died saving lives through emergency medical treatment administered under fire. The hospital bearing his name continued saving lives through comprehensive healthcare provided in peacetime conditions. Evans had embodied the medic's creed that healing transcended self-preservation. The hospital staff embodying that same commitment to patient care worked in facility named to honor that principle. Evans had demonstrated that some lives were worth dying for. The hospital demonstrated that all lives were worth healing. That medical care provided with excellence represented different expression of same values Evans had proven through ultimate sacrifice. Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas, dedicated Evans Auditorium in June 1972, providing additional memorial at the training base where Evans had completed medic training. Generations of Army medics received graduation certificates in auditorium named for someone who demonstrated what medic training meant when applied under fire. Combat buddies who spoke at 1972 dedication called Evans one of the good guys and noted that many men survived Vietnam because of his actions that January day in 1967. They never forgot him. Neither would the medics graduating decades later in auditorium bearing his name. But the broader question remained unanswered by hospitals and auditoriums and medals. What compelled a 23-year-old to sacrifice everything for others? What values generated courage sufficient to override every instinct for self-preservation? What code demanded treating wounded men from different platoons when his own unit remained in relative safety? The answers existed somewhere in territory between professional duty and spiritual calling, in space where medical training transformed into moral obligation, where saving lives became imperative, transcending rational calculation of risk. Evans' name on hospital walls ensured the question would continue being asked by each generation serving after him, preserving not just memory of his sacrifice, but the values that motivated it. The question returns, unanswerable through tactical analysis or documentation review. Why would a 23-year-old repeatedly enter a kill zone to save men who weren't even from his unit? The mathematics of survival argued for staying in cover. Professional duty had been satisfied after the first rescue. Unit regulations didn't require exposing himself for casualties outside his assigned platoon. Yet Evans made trip after trip, each crossing increasing probability of death until probability became certainty. The answer existed somewhere beyond rational calculation, in territory where professional training transformed into moral calling. The medic's code operates at intersection of medical ethics and military duty, creating unique moral burdens that transform healing into spiritual commitment. Medical ethics demand treating all patients impartially, providing care based on clinical need rather than personal connection or tactical advantage. Military ethics demand loyalty to unit and mission, prioritizing force protection and operational objectives. For combat medics, these obligations create impossible calculations, move toward danger when instinct demands retreat, treat enemy wounded alongside friends, continue functioning when witnessing horrors that would break most people. The Geneva Convention provides protections medics cannot renounce. They may carry only defensive weapons, must wear identifying red crosses, cannot become combatants by choice, But enemy forces routinely ignore these protections, targeting medics specifically to multiply casualties and break unit cohesion. Evans's actions weren't aberration, but logical extreme of values all medics share. The code demands treating every wounded soldier regardless of risk, regardless of unit affiliation, regardless of tactical calculations, arguing for abandoning casualties when rescue probability approaches zero. This creates situations where the most compassionate soldiers face the greatest danger, where medical training becomes moral imperative, where saving lives transcends self-preservation. 15 Army medics and 4 Navy corpsmen received the Medal of Honor during Vietnam. 19 total recognitions of courage so extraordinary it exceeded normal expectations of military service. 10 awarded posthumously, proving that the medics code sometimes demanded everything. The code's deepest truth emerged through Evans's sacrifice. Courage, at its highest form, is measured not in enemies killed, but in lives saved. Infantry soldiers trained to close with and destroy enemy forces, measured success through body counts and terrain secured. Medics trained to heal regardless of whose life hung in balance, measured success through casualties saved and wounded returned to families. Evans demonstrated that heroism defined through violence represented incomplete understanding of courage. True valor sometimes meant accepting death to preserve life, meant moving towards screaming when tactical logic demanded withdrawal, meant treating wounds inflicted by enemy you could legally kill, but morally must heal if wounded. Evans' Medal of Honor rests in display case somewhere, bronze star suspended from sky blue ribbon. His name marks Evans Army Community Hospital at Fort Carson and Evans Auditorium at Fort Sam Houston. His story is told to new medics during training, reminding them that duty sometimes demands everything. But the deepest memorial exists in accumulated actions of thousands of medics who serve after him, who wear the Red Cross knowing it makes them targets, who move towards danger when brothers need healing, who accept burdens the medic's code demands without question or hesitation. Evans proved through ultimate sacrifice that some lives are worth dying for, that the code, permitting no calculation of personal risk against duty owed to wounded men, represented not abstract principle, but lived reality. The final truth transcends memorials and medals. Evans gave everything so others could live, and in giving everything demonstrated that courage and compassion aren't separate virtues, but inseparable expressions of highest humanity. His sacrifice proved that military service at its finest isn't measured in destruction delivered, but in lives preserved. That heroes sometimes wear no weapons except medical bags, and carry no ammunition except morphine and bandages, that the greatest battles aren't won through killing, but through refusing to let brothers die when you possess skill to save them. The medic's code demanded everything from Evans. He gave everything willingly, and in giving, he demonstrated values that endure across generations, proving that duty and compassion, properly understood, become indistinguishable from love.